chamber was impossible. That was the first thought that crossed David Foster's mind as the transport platform materialized him inside the Galactic Council headquarters. The room stretched in every direction, defying physics and human comprehension. Thousands of platforms floated in concentric circles, each holding a delegate from a different world. Some breathed methane. Others existed as pure energy. A few were so ancient they had evolved beyond physical form entirely. David stood alone on the central platform. Below him, nothing but stars. Above him, the same. The platform beneath his feet was the only solid thing in an ocean of space. His heart hammered against his ribs. Earth had been part of the galactic community for exactly 42 standard cycles. He had been their ambassador for 3. Today, he stood accused. Human delegate. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. It resonated in frequencies that made David's teeth ache. You will answer for your species' crimes against the natural order. David forced himself to stand straight. He wore a simple black suit. No weapons. No technology beyond the translator implant in his ear. The council had been very specific about that. Humans were to come unarmed, unprotected, and completely at their mercy. A hologram materialized in the center of the chamber. It showed a battlefield. 2 massive fleets tearing each other apart in the darkness of space. The Kelter Armada and the Vrex Coalition. David recognized it immediately. The war had been raging for 9 years. 40 billion dead. Entire planets reduced to ash. The Kelter-Vrex conflict, the voice continued. It belonged to High Chancellor Mordok, a being composed entirely of crystallized thought. Estimated time to conclusion, 7 more years. Projected additional casualties, 60 billion. Status as of yesterday ended. Hologram shifted. The same 2 fleets, but now they floated peacefully. Representatives from both sides stood together, signing documents. Mediator of record, human diplomatic team led by Ambassador Foster. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Thousands of alien species, speaking in thousands of languages, all expressing the same thing: disbelief, suspicion, fear. Before this, Mordok said, the Dreckner insurgency. 12 years of fighting. You ended it in 4 months. Before that, the colonial rebellions in the Outer Rim. 17 separate conflicts. You merged them into one negotiation and resolved all 17 in 6 weeks. The holograms kept coming. Battle after battle. War after war. Each one showing the same pattern. Long, brutal conflicts, suddenly ending the moment humans became involved. In 42 cycles, your species has interfered in 51 galactic conflicts. All 51 ended in negotiated peace. The statistical probability of this occurring naturally is 0.000001%. David said nothing. His hands were sweating inside his pockets, but his face remained calm. He had known this day was coming. Earth had known. They had prepared him for this moment since the day he accepted the position. You will explain, Mordok commanded. How a species that cannot even travel faster than light without borrowed technology has systematically dismantled conflicts that our greatest military minds declared unsolvable. You will explain how you end wars. The chamber fell silent. Every delegate waited. Some were curious, others were angry. A few looked terrified. David took a slow breath. May I ask a question first? You may. Why do you want to stop me? The question hung in the air like a physical thing. Several delegates activated their communication systems, conferring with advisors across the galaxy. Mordak's crystalline form pulsed with light that suggested confusion. Your question makes no sense, Mordak said. You have violated 73 separate articles of the Galactic Charter. You have manipulated military outcomes. You have influenced sovereign conflicts without authorization. I've saved lives, David interrupted. He knew it was dangerous to cut off the High Chancellor, but he also knew he had one chance to make his point. 97 billion beings are alive right now who would be dead if those wars had continued. I'm asking you, High Chancellor, why that's a crime. It's because it is not the natural way. The shout came from one of the lower platforms. Delegate Krax of the Horthian Empire. His species had built their entire civilization on warrior culture. Conflict determines strength. War separates the worthy from the weak. You humans interfere with the fundamental order of galactic society. It's a fundamental order, David repeated. He gestured at the holograms still floating around them. Is this order? Billions dead? Planets destroyed? Entire generations growing up knowing nothing but war? Yes, Krax roared. This is how civilizations evolve. How they prove their right to exist. The strong survive. The weak perish. This has been true since the first species reached for the stars, has it? David asked. Or is that just what you tell yourselves? The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted in languages David's translator couldn't process. Energy beings flashed with colors that indicated rage. Physical species activated weapon systems on their platforms. Silence. Mordak's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. The chamber fell quiet instantly. Human, you will explain your statement. His heart was still racing, but his voice was steady. I've spent 3 years studying galactic history. Every conflict, every war, every peace treaty. I've analyzed them all, and I found something interesting. Do you want to know what it was? Proceed, Mordak said. I found that every major galactic conflict in the last 1,000 years had one thing in common. They were all profitable, not for the civilizations fighting them, but for someone, defense contractors, weapons manufacturers, resource speculators, mercenary guilds. Every single war generated enormous wealth for beings who weren't actually fighting. David pulled up his own hologram. Economic data, trade routes, financial records. He had spent months gathering this information, pulling it from public records that everyone could access, but no one had bothered to connect. The Keltervrex War generated 4 trillion credits per year in military contracts. The Drekner insurgency made 6 different weapons manufacturers into the richest corporations in their sectors. The colonial rebellions drove resource prices up by 300%, making speculators unimaginable profits. He looked around the chamber. I'm not saying the warriors didn't believe in their causes. I'm not saying the politicians didn't think they were doing the right thing. But I am saying that there were beings who benefited from those wars continuing. Beings who had every reason to make sure peace never came. This is conspiracy theory, a delegate protested. Is it? David pulled up more data. After we ended the Keltervrex War, 17 major defense contractors declared bankruptcy within 6 months. For mercenary guilds dissolved. The price of Starlighter crashed, wiping out speculator fortunes. Peace destroyed their business model. Mordak's crystalline form dimmed slightly. You suggest that galactic conflicts are maintained for economic benefit? I suggest that when war is profitable, peace becomes a threat. And I suggest that humans, who don't benefit from galactic conflicts and don't participate in your military economy, were the first ones to actually want peace more than profit. The chamber was silent again. But this time, the quality of the silence was different. It wasn't confused. It was thoughtful, uncomfortable. We end wars, David continued, because we don't have a reason to keep them going. We're not selling weapons. We're not speculating on resources. We're not building empires. We're just trying to stop beings from killing each other. And apparently, that's revolutionary enough to be considered a crime. Mordak was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight it hadn't before. The council will deliberate on your statement. But first, you will answer the original question. How do you end wars? What method do you use? David smiled slightly. It wasn't a happy smile. That's the thing, High Chancellor. I don't think you really want to know. Because once I tell you, everything changes. Every conflict you've ever fought, every battle you've ever considered necessary, you'll have to look at differently. Tell us anyway, Mordak commanded. David looked around the chamber one more time, at the thousands of species, the billions of years of collective history. The empires and confederations and alliances built on the foundation of managed conflict. We make them care, he said simply. That's all. We make the people fighting see each other as people instead of enemies. We make commanders think about the individuals they're sending to die. We make politicians connect their decisions with actual suffering. We don't use technology or weapons or tactics. We just use the one thing humans have that apparently no other species does. And what is that? Mordok asked. Can't stop caring? Even when we want to. Even when it hurts. We can't turn it off. The silence that followed was absolute. The council chamber remained frozen in that moment. David could see delegates conferring frantically on their platforms. Some looked confused. Others looked angry. A few looked like they were beginning to understand something they had never considered before. Hi, Chancellor. Mordak's crystalline form pulsed with different colors. David's translator interpreted them as thought patterns. Mordok was processing, calculating, trying to understand what the human had just said. Explain further, Mordok finally said. This concept of caring. All sentient species possess empathy. It is a fundamental rec. Irement for civilization. Your claim suggests you possess something unique. David nodded. You're right. Every species has empathy. But there's a difference between having it and being unable to escape it. Can I show you something? At Mordak's gesture of permission, David activated his own holographic display. It showed human history, ancient Earth, wars throughout the ages. Humans spent most of our existence fighting each other. We were very good at it. We developed weapons that could destroy our entire planet. We came within minutes of actually using them. But something else happened alongside our wars. We developed an entire field of study called psychology. We created it because our soldiers kept breaking. The hologram showed human soldiers. Their faces were haunted, empty, staring at nothing. We called it shell shock, battle fatigue, post-traumatic stress disorder. Whatever name we used, the reality was the same. Human beings who killed other human beings carried that weight forever. It didn't matter if the killing was justified. It didn't matter if it was war. Our brains couldn't process it without damage. Delegate Krax spoke up. This is weakness. Warriors must be strong. They must do what is necessary without emotional compromise. Can you? David asked. Delegate Krax, your service record says you've commanded forces in 23 battles. 7,000 enemy combatants died under your command. How many of them do you remember? Krax's translator emitted a sound of confusion. I remember the battles, the strategies, the victories. Do you remember their faces? Their names? Do you think about them at night? Of course not. They were enemies. They died with honor in combat. This is the way of war. Exactly, David said. You don't remember them? Your mind lets you forget. It has to, or you couldn't function. You can abstract the deaths into numbers, statistics, acceptable losses. Your brain protects you from the weight of those 7,000 lives. He turned back to the council. Humans can't do that. A human commander who sends soldiers to die remembers them. Maybe not every name, but the weight of that decision. It affects their sleep, their health, their entire life afterward. We carry every death. We can't make it abstract. We can't make it just numbers. David pulled up more data. After Earth's last major war, we studied the psychological impact on our soldiers. 94% showed symptoms of trauma. 94%. Not from being injured. From what they had seen and done. From the lives they had taken, even in legitimate combat. This seems inefficient, said a delegate from the Tython Collective. How do you maintain military readiness if your warriors are psychologically damaged by performing their function? We don't, David said simply. We don't maintain military readiness, not like you do. Because we learned that the cost of war isn't just the lives lost in battle. It's the lives destroyed afterward. The soldiers who come home but never really leave the battlefield. The families torn apart. The generations traumatized. Paused. We learned that war costs more than we could afford to pay. Not economically, psychologically, as a species. We reached a breaking point where we realized that if we kept fighting the way we had been, we would destroy ourselves from the inside out. Mordak's form pulsed thoughtfully. And this is why you interfere in our conflicts? Because you project your own psychological limitations onto other species? No, David said, because we recognize the pattern. We see civilizations heading toward the same breaking point we reached, and we know what comes next if no one intervenes. What comes next? Mordak asked. David's expression grew dark. Extinction. Either you destroy yourselves in one final war, or you build a society so dependent on conflict that you can never stop. You become trapped in an endless cycle of violence that hollows out your civilization from within. He activated another hologram. This one showed galactic archaeological data. Ruins of ancient civilizations scattered across the galaxy. The Council's own records show 87. Advanced civilizations that reached your level of technology and then vanished. No external threats. No natural disasters. They just destroyed themselves. The archaeological evidence shows the same pattern every time. They developed weapons capable of planetary destruction. They engaged in total war, and they annihilated themselves. This is known, Mordak said. It is why we established the Galactic Charter, to prevent such outcomes through managed conflict. Managed conflict, David repeated. You mean controlled warfare? Wars that are profitable enough to maintain your economy, but limited enough to avoid extinction. You've built an entire civilization on the idea that war is inevitable, so you might as well profit from it. Several delegates began protesting, but David continued over them. But what if war isn't inevitable? What if the only reason you keep fighting is because no one has shown you how to stop? That's what humans do. We show you the alternative. By manipulating our emotions, Cracks accused. By making warrior soft. By destroying the foundation of strength that civilizations are built upon. Is that what you think strength is? David asked. The ability to kill without feeling it? The capacity to watch billions die and call it acceptable losses? That's not strength. Delegate Cracks. That's numbness. That's what happens when a species develops emotional calluses to protect themselves from the horror of what they're doing. He looked around the chamber. Humans never developed those calluses. We feel every death, every casualty, every life destroyed by conflict. And yes, it makes us weak in some ways. We can't maintain large standing armies without psychological support systems. We can't engage in prolonged conflicts without our society fracturing. We can't treat war as business as usual, but it also means we can't ignore suffering. When we see beings dying in wars that could be prevented, we can't walk away. We can't abstract it into acceptable losses. We have to try to stop it, even when it's not our fight, because we're incapable of not caring. The chamber was silent. David could see some delegates processing this information, trying to understand a psychological framework so fundamentally different from their own. A new voice spoke. It came from the highest tier of the chamber, where the oldest civilizations observed. Ambassador Foster. I am Elder Voth of the Ancient Concord. My civilization has existed for 2 million of your years. We have observed your species since you achieved space travel. I have one question. David waited. You speak of human psychology as if it is fixed, as if you are trapped by your inability to abstract suffering, but evolution is constant. Given enough time, exposed to enough conflict, would your species not eventually develop the same emotional defenses that we possess? Would you not become like us? It was the question David had been dreading, the one that kept him awake at night. He took a breath before answering. Maybe, he admitted. Maybe if we stayed in galactic society long enough, if we participated in enough conflicts, we would develop those defenses. We would learn to stop caring so much, to make deaths into numbers, to accept war as inevitable. Paused. That's exactly why we're trying to end wars as quickly as possible, because we're afraid of what we might become if we don't. We're afraid that the galaxy will teach us to stop caring. And if that happens, if humans become just another species that accepts war as normal, then the galaxy loses the only beings who still remember that peace is possible. Eldervoth was silent for a long moment. So you interfere not just to save others, but to save yourselves. To preserve your own psychological integrity, David said. Is that selfish? Maybe, but the result is the same. Beings who would have died get to live. Wars that would have continued for years end in months. Children grow up with parents instead of as orphans. If our motivation is partly self-preservation, does that make the outcome less valuable? No one answered. Mordok finally spoke. The council must deliberate on what we have heard. But I will tell you, Ambassador Foster, that you have presented us with an uncomfortable truth. If what you say is accurate, then the foundation of galactic civilization may be built on a psychological adaptation that humans lack. Not lack, David corrected gently. Never developed. Because we almost destroyed ourselves before we could. And now, you seek to prevent us from following the same path. Yes, whether we want your help or not. David met Mordak's gaze steadily. Yes. The council chamber hummed with energy as delegates debated among themselves. David stood in the center, waiting. His legs ached from standing so long, but the platform offered no chairs. Humans were the only species that seemed to need them. Mordok raised a crystalline appendage, and silence fell. The council has discussed your statements, Ambassador Foster. Many delegates wish to ask questions. We will hear from them now. A platform descended from the upper tiers. On it stood a being David had never seen before. It looked like liquid metal poured into a vaguely humanoid shape, constantly shifting and reforming. I am Coordinator Shell of the Melkin Unity. My species has fought 3 wars in the last century. All 3 ended in our victory. Our economy thrives. Our population grows. Why would we want your interference? Why would we choose peace when war has brought us prosperity? David had expected this question. Coordinator Shell, may I ask about your 3rd war? The one against the Orthan colonies? What of it? Shal's form rippled with what the translator interpreted as pride. We conquered 7 colony worlds, gained access to rich mineral deposits, established our dominance in the sector. The war lasted for years. How many Melkin citizens died? 200,000 military personnel. Acceptable casualties for the territory gained. And how many Orthan civilians died? Shal's form stopped shifting for a moment. I do not have those numbers readily available. 17 million, David provided. Men, women, and children. The Orthan colonies kept detailed records before their government collapsed. 17 million beings who had nothing to do with the conflict between your governments. They just happened to live on worlds you wanted. War has costs, Shal said, but the voice was less certain now. Yes, it does. But here's what I find interesting. After you conquered those worlds, what happened to the mineral deposits you wanted? We began extraction operations, obviously, which required workers. But the local population was devastated. So you had to import labor from Melkin worlds, which cost more than the minerals were worth. The colonies have been operating at a loss for 3 years now. Your economy is thriving despite the war, not because of it. David pulled up economic data. Your weapons manufacturers made enormous profits. The military contractors did well. The beings who sold supplies to your fleet got rich. But the Melkin people? The average citizens saw their taxes increase by 40% to fund the war. Living standards declined. And you're still paying for the occupation of worlds that cost more to maintain than they produce. You reduce everything to economics, Shal protested.
Oh.
David said. I reduce it to people. 17 million Orthans who died for minerals you didn't need? 200,000 Melkin soldiers who died for an empire that made them poorer. Also, a few corporations could increase their profits. That's not strength, Coordinator. That's being used. Another platform descended. This delegate was insectoid, with dozens of legs and multifaceted eyes. I am Hive Speaker Trex of the Collective Swarm. Your words are interesting, human, but they ignore biological reality. My species requires conflict for population control. Without war, we would overpopulate our worlds within a generation. War is not choice for us. It is necessity. David nodded. I'm familiar with your species biology. You're right that the collective swarm has an extremely high birth rate, but I've also read your agricultural reports. Your worlds can support 3 times your current population if farming methods were updated. You use war for population control because it's easier than changing your food production systems. Changing our entire agricultural infrastructure would take decades and enormous resources, Trek said. Less resources than you spend on war, David countered. Your military budget for the last decade could have completely modernized your farming on all 17 hive worlds. You'd have no food shortage, no population pressure, and no need to send your young to die in conflicts that serve no purpose except to keep your numbers down. You know nothing of our culture. Trek's translator conveyed anger. We are warriors. We have always been warriors. You ask us to abandon our entire identity, asking if that identity is serving you or killing you. David's voice was gentle but firm. I'm asking if the young soldiers who die in your wars are dying for a real purpose or because your leaders haven't bothered to find a better solution to an agricultural problem. Chamber erupted in arguments. Some delegates defended their conflicts. Others began questioning things they had never questioned before. David could see the cracks forming in the certainty that had governed galactic civilization for thousands of years. Mordok called for silence again. When he spoke, his voice carried a tone David had not heard before. Uncertainty. Ambassador Foster, you present compelling arguments about individual conflicts, but you ignore the larger truth. Civilization requires hierarchy. Hierarchy requires conflict. The strong must rise, and the weak must fall. This has been true since the first species climbed from their oceans. Without this pressure, without this struggle, how would civilizations evolve? How would they improve? David had been waiting for this. The core question. The foundational belief that held everything else together. Hi, Chancellor. May I tell you about a human scientist named Charles Darwin? Proceed. Darwin studied evolution on Earth. He discovered that species adapt to their environments through a process called natural selection. The strong survive. The weak die. Their traits pass on or disappear. For a long time, humans interpreted this as meaning that conflict was natural and necessary, that we should embrace struggle because it made us stronger. David pulled up images of Earth's history. We used this idea to justify terrible things. Wars, genocides, social systems where we let the poor starve, because we thought it was natural selection. We convinced ourselves that cruelty was evolution in action. And then we learned something important. Darwin was right about biological evolution. But he was describing a process that happens over millions of years through genetic adaptation. Human civilization changes on a much faster scale. Cultural evolution, technological evolution. These don't follow the same rules. I do not understand the distinction, Mordok said. Biological evolution is slow and random. A species might develop better claws over 1 million years. But cultural evolution is fast and directed. A species can go from living in caves to building starships in 10,000 years. The rules are different. David gestured at the council chamber. Every species here evolved through biological conflict. Predator and prey. Survival of the fittest. That's why you think conflict is necessary. Because for billions of years it was. But you're not evolving biologically anymore. You've conquered your environments. You live on artificial habitats. You've moved beyond natural selection. But you still think like prey animals afraid of predators? Like predators competing for territory. You're applying biological evolution rules to civilizations that are evolving culturally, and it doesn't work the same way. Another delegate spoke up. Then how do civilizations improve without conflict? Cooperation, David said. Competition? Yes, but non-violent competition. The pressure to solve problems, create better technology, understand the universe. You don't need to kill each other to evolve. You just need challenges to overcome. He pulled up data from human history again. Earth's greatest technological advances didn't come from warfare. They came from trying to solve problems, trying to cure diseases, trying to feed populations, Trying to explore space? War sometimes accelerated technology, but it was never the only path, just the one you kept choosing because it was familiar. Familiarity is comfort, Elder Voth observed. You ask civilizations to abandon the familiar. I ask them to choose a harder path, David corrected. Peace is harder than war. Cooperation is harder than conflict. Building is harder than destroying. I'm not offering an easy solution. I'm offering one that doesn't require billions to die for the comfort of the familiar. The chamber fell silent again. David could feel the weight of thousands of years of civilization pressing down on his words. He was one human, standing against the combined history of hundreds of species. It should have been impossible, but he had seen the alternative. He had walked through the ruins of civilizations that had destroyed themselves. He had studied the patterns. He knew where the familiar path led. The council must deliberate further, Mordok said. We will adjourn for 6 standard hours. Ambassador Foster, you will remain in the holding chambers. As the platform began to transport David away, he heard Mordok add one more thing, so quietly it was almost lost in the sound of the transport. And we will consider whether the familiar path is truly the right one. The holding chamber was small but comfortable. David sat on a bench designed for multiple body types, staring at the wall that showed a projection of Earth. Home. He had not been there in 2 years. The diplomatic missions kept him moving through space. From conflict to conflict, negotiation to negotiation, his communicator chimed. A message from Earth. From Director Kim of the Diplomatic Corps. David, the council session is being broadcast across the entire galaxy. Every species is watching. Whatever happens next, you've already changed the conversation. People are asking questions they've never asked before. That's a victory in itself. David smiled slightly. Trust Kim to find the positive angle. But he knew the truth. Questions were not enough. Change required action. And action required the council to make a choice they had never considered. The chamber door opened. Instead of a guard, it was Elder Voth who entered. The ancient being moved slowly, its form shifting between states of matter that David's eyes could not fully process. Elder Voth, David stood. I was told I was to wait here until the deliberations concluded, Voth agreed. I am not here officially. I am here as an individual, seeking understanding. May I ask you something, Ambassador? Of course. Voth settled into a shape that suggested sitting, though it never quite touched the bench. My civilization is old. Older than most species can comprehend. We have seen empires rise and fall. We have watched the patterns repeat across millions of years. And in all that time, we have operated on one fundamental assumption, that intelligent species inevitably trend toward conflict. But you suggest otherwise, Voth continued. You suggest that conflict is a choice, not an inevitability. This troubles me deeply, because if you are correct, then everything my civilization has built, every decision we have made, was based on a flawed premise. David sat down again, considering his words carefully. Elder Voth, may I ask you something? In 2 million years, how many times has your species been at war? We do not wage war ourselves. We observe, we record. We maintain the archives of galactic history. But you've observed thousands of wars. Millions, Voth corrected. And in all those millions of wars, how many could have been prevented? Voth was silent for a long moment. That is an impossible question. How can one know what might have been? Is it impossible? Or have you just never asked it? We assumed that wars happened for reasons. Resources, territory, ideology. These things create conflict naturally, do they? David pulled up his data display again. I've analyzed every major galactic conflict in the last 1,000 years. I looked at the stated reasons for war and compared them to what actually happened. Do you know what I found? Tell me. In 83% of cases, the war cost more than the stated goal was worth. Territory that cost more to conquer than it produced. Resources that could have been obtained through trade for a fraction of the military expense. Ideological conflicts that resulted in neither side achieving their objectives. David stood and began pacing. Wars almost never make logical sense when you actually calculate the costs. They happen because someone benefits from them happening, and that someone is usually not the people doing the fighting. You speak of conspiracy, Voth said. No, I speak of incentive structures. In a galaxy where war is profitable, where military production drives the economy, where conflict creates opportunity for advancement, peace becomes a threat to the established order. Not because of some grand conspiracy, but because the entire system is built to reward conflict and punish peace. And humans are not part of this system. We're too new. We haven't integrated into the military-industrial complex that runs the galaxy. We don't manufacture weapons for other species. We don't have territorial ambitions beyond our own solar system. We don't benefit from war, so we have no incentive to encourage it. Voth shifted its form thoughtfully. That will change. Already I have heard proposals to bring Earth into the weapons trade, to offer you contracts for military production, to integrate you into the galactic economy properly, I know David said. That's the other reason we're trying to change things quickly. Because once we're part of the system, once we benefit from war like everyone else, we'll lose the ability to see the alternative. We'll become like you, accepting conflict as inevitable because our prosperity depends on it. You make it sound as if we are trapped, aren't you? Can the Council end the weapons trade? Can you stop military production? Can you restructure the galactic economy away from conflict without causing a collapse that would affect billions? Voth's silence was answer enough. That's the trap, David said. You've built a civilization where peace is economically impossible, where ending war would cause more immediate harm than allowing it to continue. You're locked in a system that requires conflict to function. And you think you can break this system? One species? One human standing in a council chamber, making speeches? No, David admitted. I can't break the system. But I can show people that the system exists, that it's not natural or inevitable, that it's a choice you've been making without realizing you were making it. To what end? So that the next generation asks different questions, so that young beings of every species grow up knowing that war isn't the only path, so that slowly, over time, the system changes because enough people want it to change. But Voth stood, its form becoming more solid. You think in terms of generations, of slow change. But the Council must make a decision today. About you. About humanity. About whether to allow you to continue your interference. I know. What will you do if we ban you? If we send humanity back to Earth and forbid you from participating in galactic affairs? David looked at the projection of Earth on the wall. We'll obey. We have to. We're not strong enough to fight the entire galaxy. But we'll wait. And we'll hope that someday someone else will ask the questions we're asking now. And if no one does, then the galaxy will continue as it always has. Wars will be fought. Beings will die. The cycle will continue until eventually, inevitably, someone develops a weapon so powerful that it ends everything. That's what the archaeological evidence suggests happened to those 47 civilizations. They reached a breaking point and destroyed themselves. You believe this is inevitable for us as well? I believe it's the most likely outcome unless something changes. Unless someone breaks the cycle. Voth moved toward the door, then paused. Ambassador Foster, I came here seeking understanding. I believe I have found it, but I am not certain the truth is as comforting as I hoped. The truth rarely is, David said. After Voth left, David sat alone with his thoughts. The 6 hours of deliberation stretched before him. Whatever the Council decided would determine not just his future, but Earth's place in the galaxy. Humanity had gambled everything on the belief that peace was possible, that caring mattered, that empathy could change the universe soon. They would know if that gamble had paid off. The 6 hours felt like 6 years. When the transport finally activated, bringing David back to the council chamber, he found it transformed. Every platform was occupied now. Species that had not attended the initial session had arrived. The chamber held not hundreds, but thousands of delegates. Word had spread across the galaxy. Everyone wanted to witness the decision. High Chancellor Mordok stood in the center position, his crystalline form pulsing with light that suggested deep thought. Ambassador Foster, Murdoch began, his voice resonating through the massive chamber. The council has deliberated. We have consulted our histories, our economists, our philosophers. We have analyzed your claims and examined the evidence. We have looked, perhaps for the first time, at the foundations upon which galactic civilization is built. David stood motionless, barely breathing. What we found was ... uncomfortable. The patterns you identified exist. The economic incentives you described are real. The cycle of conflict you outlined matches our historical data. You have held up a mirror to galactic civilization, and we do not entirely like what we see reflected. A murmur ran through the assembled delegates. However, Murdoch continued, understanding a problem and solving it are different challenges. The council is divided. Some believe you offer a path to a better future. Others believe you threaten the stability that has maintained galactic civilization for millennia. Still others believe you are simply naive, that you do not understand the realities of governing billions across thousands of worlds. The vote has been taken by a margin of 53% to 47%. The Council has decided to implement a new protocol regarding human involvement in galactic conflicts. David's heart hammered. 53%. It could go either way, effective immediately. Humans are banned from direct participation in military conflicts between galactic powers. David felt his stomach drop. However, Murdoch raised an appendage. Humans are invited to establish the Bureau of Peaceful Resolution within the Council structure. This bureau will be granted authority to offer mediation services to any parties engaged in conflict who voluntarily request assistance. You will not interfere in wars unless invited. But if invited, you will have full council backing to attempt negotiated settlements. The chamber erupted. Half the delegates protested loudly. The other half seemed cautiously optimistic. David stood in stunned silence. Additionally, Murdoch continued over the noise. The council will establish an investigation into the economic structure surrounding military conflicts. We will examine whether the incentives Ambassador Foster described are artificially prolonging wars that could be resolved peacefully. This investigation will take years, possibly decades, but it will be thorough. Delegate Crack stood, his forearms gesturing angrily. This is weakness. You reward the human for his interference. You allow him to poison our civilization with his soft philosophy. No, Delegate Cracks, Murdoch replied. We acknowledge that we have questions we have never asked, and we grant ourselves the opportunity to seek answers. If the human is wrong, the investigation will prove it. If he is right, we have a moral obligation to change. Moral obligation, Cracks spat. Since when does the council concern itself with morality? Since today, Murdoch said simply. Elder Voth spoke from the highest tier. Ambassador Foster, you asked us to consider whether our familiar path was the right one. The council has decided to at least examine the question. This is not the complete victory you sought, but it is a beginning. Are you satisfied? David found his voice. A beginning is all I asked for, Elder Voth. Thank you. Do not thank us yet, Murdoch warned. Your Bureau of Peaceful Resolution will be tested. There are parties in this chamber who will work to ensure you fail, who will refuse your services and point to that refusal as proof that your methods are not universal. You will face opposition at every turn. I understand, David said. Do you? Murdoch's form pulsed with intensity. You have made powerful enemies today. Species whose entire economy depends on war. Corporations that profit from conflict. Military leaders who define themselves by combat. They will undermine you. They will spread propaganda against you. They will do everything possible to prove that humanity's way is inferior. And if we succeed anyway, David asked, then you will have done something no species has done in galactic history. You will have changed the fundamental nature of how civilizations interact. That terrifies some beings in this chamber. They would rather see you fail than face such change. David nodded slowly. High Chancellor, I have one request. Speak, the Bureau of Peaceful Resolution. I want it staffed not just by humans, but by any being from any species who believes peace is possible, Who wants to learn our methods? Who can't accept war as inevitable? Mordok was silent for a moment. You would teach others your techniques? Share your supposed advantages. They're not advantages. They're just different perspectives. And yes, I would teach anyone who wants to learn. Because this isn't about human superiority. It's about showing that another way exists, proved, Mordok said. Though I wonder if you realize what you are doing. By teaching others, you may create a movement that even you cannot control. That's the idea, David replied. The chamber fell silent. Then, slowly, delegates began to depart. Some angry, some thoughtful, some uncertain about what had just happened. As David's platform prepared to transport him out, Delegate Krax approached. His translator crackled with barely controlled rage. Enjoy your small victory, human. The Horthian Empire will never request your services. We will prove that strength through combat is superior to your weakness through negotiation. And when we do, your entire philosophy will be revealed as the delusion it is. David met his gaze. Delegate Krax, I hope you're right. I truly do. Because if you can show that war is necessary and beneficial, then I've been wrong about everything. And I would rather be wrong than see billions die unnecessarily. Krax's translator emitted a confused sound. He turned and left without another word. Elder Voth approached next. Ambassador, a word of warning. There are forces in this galaxy older and more powerful than the Council. They have maintained the current order for reasons you do not yet understand. What you have started today may attract their attention. Be careful, Elder Voth. What forces are you talking about? That is not for me to say. Simply know that galactic civilization has layers you have not yet encountered. Today you pushed against the visible structure, but there are invisible structures beneath, and they do not like being disturbed. Before David could ask more, Voth departed. Alone again, David activated his communicator. Director Kim's face appeared, beaming. David, we saw everything. It's not perfect, but it's more than we hoped for. Kim, Elder Voth, said something strange about forces beyond the Council. Do we know anything about that? Kim's smile faded slightly. There are rumors. Intelligence suggests there may be older civilizations, ones that predate the Council, that maintain influence behind the scenes. But we have no proof. Just whispers. Keep investigating. Something tells me this is just the beginning. Understood. When will you return to Earth? David looked at the star field surrounding the Council chamber. Somewhere in that vast darkness, beings were fighting and dying. Wars were raging. And now, for the first time, there was a sanctioned path to ending them. I'm not coming back yet. I need to set up the Bureau. Start recruiting. Prepare for the first species that asks for help. There's too much work to do. David, you've been out here for 2 years. You should come home. Rest. I will, eventually. But right now, every day I delay is a day more beings die in wars that could be prevented. I can't walk away from that, Kim sighed. You sound like every other human I've worked with. Unable to stop caring, even when it costs you everything. Maybe that's not a flaw, David said. Maybe that's exactly what the galaxy needs. After ending the call, David stood alone in the vast chamber. The decision had been made. Humanity had earned a place at the table, not through force, not through superior technology, but through the simple, stubborn refusal to accept that war was inevitable. It was a small victory, a crack in the foundation of galactic civilization, but cracks could spread. Questions could multiply, and slowly, over time, maybe the entire structure could change. David thought about the billions of beings who would never know his name, who would never know that a human stood in a council chamber and asked uncomfortable questions. But they would live. They would raise families. They would dream of futures that war would have stolen. That was enough. As the transport activated, carrying him toward whatever came next, David allowed himself a small smile. The galaxy thought it was banning humans from war. What it had actually done was give humanity permission to wage peace. And humans, with their inability to stop caring, their refusal to accept suffering as inevitable, their stubborn belief that a better way existed, were very good at that kind of warfare. The fight for peace had just begun. And this time, the galaxy had no idea what was about to hit it. Retriclod can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. Sonnet 4.5